Okay. So we're going to be covering session 18 today from the Law of One. And I don't have the date up. Does anyone have a format of the reading? Sometimes it's nice to, oh yeah, February 4th. So session 18 came through not even a month after they began this work, session 1. So they were still getting into these sessions really, they were hitting it pretty hard. And it's a juicy session, so I'm excited to dive in with y'all. And before we begin the reading, I just want to take a moment and recognize those of Ra who name themselves to be humble messengers of the Law of One, and they are attending Earth and have been for a long time to help us, and especially now in the time of transition from third to fourth density. And the effort they put in to help this material, the Law of One and the raw contact, come into form is just such a gift to me, and I know to a lot of people who seek on the positive path. And so I'm so grateful to Ra and also to the rest of the members of the Confederation of Planets in Service to the Infinite Creator. And I also want to pay my respects to the LL Research Group, who without their selfless efforts, we wouldn't have this material to study. So thanks to all those entities whose shoulders we stand upon to be able to be together in this way. So sending my love to all those entities. Okay. Alrighty, so let's get into it. Anybody feel willing to start us off with a reading? Any volunteers? BJ? Okay, Carolyn, I saw you raise your hand. You go next, okay?
Oh, I'm happy for you to jump in, Caroline. I just feel like people are usually hesitant to be the first one, so I'm willing to
Let's go
do
with
it.
Caroline. Thanks, BJ.
I'm the one that likes to be first and go with
awesome.
Okay, so I have the question. This is my first Law of One. I've got it pulled up here, 18.0.
Yep.
Okay. 18.0 Ra. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the infinite creator. We communicate now. 18.1 Questioner. I was thinking last night that if I were in the place of Ra at this time, the first distortion of the Law of One might cause me to mix some erroneous data with the true information that I was transmitting to this group. Do you do this? Ra. I am Ra. We do not intentionally do this. However, there will be confusion. The errors which have occurred due to the occasional variation in the vibrational complex of this instrument due to its ingestion of a chemical substance. It is not our intent in this particular project to create erroneous information, but to express in the confining ambience of your language system the feeling of the infinite mystery of the one creation in its infinite and intelligent unity. Do I go on?
Yeah, go ahead and maybe in the next one or two.
18.2 Questioner. Can you tell me what the chemical substance is that was ingested, causes poor contact? Ra. I am Ra. This is not a clear query. Could you please restate? 18.3 Questioner. You just stated that you had some problems with the instrument because of the ingestion by the instrument of some chemical substance. Can you tell me what the substance was? Ra. I am Ra. The substance of which we speak is called vibratory sound complex, LSD. It does not give poor contact if it is used in conjunction with the contact. The difficulty of this particular substance is that there is, shall we say, a very dramatic drop-off of the effect of this substance. In each case, this instrument began this session with a distortion towards extreme vital energy, which this substance produces. However, this entity was, during the session, at the point where this substance no longer was in sufficient strength to amplify the entity's abilities to express vital energy. Thus, first the phenomenon of, shall we say, a spotty contact, and then, as the instrument relies again upon its own vibrational complexes of vital energy, the vital energy being in this case very low, it became necessary to abruptly cut off communication in order to preserve and nurture the instrument. This particular chemical substance is both helpful and unhelpful in these contacts for the causes given. 18.4 Questioner. Are there any foods that are helpful or harmful that the instrument might eat? Ra, I am Ra. This instrument has body complex distortion toward ill health, and the distortion direction corrected best by ingestion of the foodstuffs of your grains and your vegetables, as you call them. However, this is extremely unimportant when regarded as an aid with equality to other aids, such as attitude, which this instrument has in abundance. It, however, aids the vital energies of this instrument with less distortion towards ill health to ingest foodstuffs in the above manner, with occasional ingestion of what you call your meats, due to the instrument's need to lessen the distortion towards low vital energy.
That's a good stopping point. Thank you, Caroline.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yeah, so is it clear what's happening here with Carla? Amanda says
Were they
no.
taking was she taking LSD specifically for the channeling, or was this just something she took independent of the channeling?
My understanding is a friend kind of convinced her to try it. So it wasn't like specifically like, oh, she discovered LSD and thought it might be an amplifier for the contact. I think she tried it like, I should have, if I was more prepared, I would have, they do give other information about the context of her taking the LSD. But if I remember correctly, she took it earlier, like either earlier that day or the day before. And I think she took a total of like 2 or 3 times. And yeah, it wasn't like she was doing it specifically to like aid her capacity to be a channel. It was more like just her general seeking of the mystery and the novelty of LSD. And, you know, what are we here in the early 80s? And there's, you know, people who were having experiences of higher states of consciousness through the use of that substance. And they tried to get Carla to try it to see if it might help her.
It also says due to the occasional variation in the vibrational complex due to its ingestion of a chemical substance. So it sounds like more than, you know, it sounds like they're referring to more than once that it affected the channeling.
Yeah, I think, and you know, in the original 5 books, or if you go to if you go to law1.info, you can turn on Carla and Jim's commentary on each session. And I think when I read that, if I remember correctly, she sort of said that she tried it a couple times in a short period of time and then left it behind. So if we want to get into into that any further, we can, but I'm inclined to just keep moving. Okay. 18.5. BJ, do you want to read? Or anyone else?
Sure.
Okay.
Questioner, thank you. I have a question here from Jim that I will read verbatim. Quote, much of the mystic tradition of seeking on earth holds that belief that the individual self must be erased or obliterated and the material world ignored for an entity to reach nirvana, as it's called, or enlightenment. What is the proper role of the individual self and its worldly activities in aiding an entity to grow more into the law of one? I am Ra. The proper role of the entity is, in this density, to experience all things desired, and then analyze, understand, and accept these experiences, distilling from them the love light within them. Nothing shall be overcome. That which is not needed falls away. The orientation develops due to analysis of desire. These desires become more and more distorted towards conscious application of love light as the entity furnishes itself with distilled experience. We have found it to be inappropriate in the extreme to encourage the overcoming of any desires, except to suggest the imagination rather than the carrying out in the physical plane, as you call it, of those desires not consonant with the law of one, this preserving the primal distortion of free will. The reason it is unwise to overcome is that overcoming is an unbalanced action, creating difficulties in balancing in the time-space continuum. Overcoming thus creates the further environment for holding on to that which apparently has been overcome. All things are acceptable in the proper time for each entity, and in experiencing, in understanding, in accepting, and then sharing with other selves, the appropriate description shall be moving away from distortions of one kind to distortions of another, which may be more consonant with the law of one. It is, shall we say, a shortcut to simply ignore or overcome any desire. It must instead be understood and accepted. This takes patience and experience, which can be analyzed with care, with compassion for self and for other self. That's a lot.
It is a lot, and it's important. So let's just pause there. Thanks,
Yeah.
BJ. Yeah, so what do y'all think of that? Any reactions to that piece? Nia?
To me, it deepens into the know yourself, accept yourself, be one with Creator. It's one of the most beautiful explanatory versions of this was a quote that Neil had linked in Gen Chat a long time ago, and he said this was so long that he didn't do the excerpt of it. He just linked the whole link. And that specific channeling, what Quo said was like unlocking a door for me. Something clicked where it's like, this is known, it's said repeatedly as this is one of the most important factors. Accept all, accept with a capital A. And it was a struggle, super, very much a struggle for me. Yet in this particular channeling, this session with Ra and Quo's further explanation of it is that some of the things we don't accept, and this is where a longer conversation comes around. Some of these things that we don't accept, Quo says, these dark parts of yourself that you would say, I could never. And Quo said to accept those pieces, to do that shadow work, transforms it. It transmutes those into a fire for love and light and good and positive path and service to others. Utilizing that, transforming those shadow pieces, that's where the know yourself comes in. And if you don't even get past the part of knowing this thing about you, you don't get to the point of accepting it. If you don't get to the point of accepting it, you'll never see yourself as perfect facet of the one infinite creator and one of the infinite I love the word facet with it. That one tickles my brain in a way that makes sense and clicks for me, so I keep using it. But we are all unique facets of the one infinite creator expressing itself, and so that's almost like not accepting yourself is not, or not doing the shadow work is almost like not accepting the one infinite creator's creations as perfect as they are. It's tricky with the verbiage. It's like I can see it, I can know it. It's really hard to explain it, but again, that woven piece where it's just constantly weaving in and out of, and what analogy works for you to get to doing the shadow work. Know yourself, accept yourself, be one with Creator.
Yeah. Anyone else? Amanda.
I think what I was paying attention to, and which Ra was saying that to use our imagination to play with our desires, with the desires that are inconsistent with the law of one. I think I understood that I think the metaphor that came to me was I was imagining if I was driving along and I had the urge to like yell at somebody or flip them off or something like that. And then rather than actually do that, because that would, like, say I had the desire to flip somebody off while I was driving, rather just allow my imagination to just go through that scenario and like really like, you know, play it out in my in a non-judgmental place inside of myself, rather than actually do that, because it would be inconsistent with the law of one. And then therefore that desire would get satiated, and then yeah, I guess that's what I was thinking of with that.
Yep.
So rather than try to, like, I think what my in the past and even still sometimes I would kind of either shame myself or berate myself for having such a lowly desire to act in such a manner that I would consider to be beneath me. Like, just don't even shame myself and just be like, oh, here I am. I wish I could flip that person off. I wonder what that would be like. And then like go through the process of it in my mind without actually, you know, doing it in real life. And then like causing that I guess that negativity and that negative reaction.
Yeah, totally. That's such a great example. It's so relatable. BJ?
Something that it pings for me is like how this is something that I've talked about before, like how I think we often try to progress on our spiritual path by creating like rules and limits and limiting ourselves. And I think our spiritual evolution is actually moving us towards more and more freedom. So that's what stands out to me. Like like Ra doesn't usually say things like inappropriate in the extreme. Like that's like, whoa,
Right.
inappropriate in the extreme.
Mhm.
It moves us away from freedom to try to overcome something. And what I have found helpful to myself is that sort of understanding of like limiting ourselves, you know, through rules or through the ideas of right and wrong way, doesn't actually progress us. You know, it tries to skip over something that is going to come back around somehow and can often come out sideways and, you know, grow in the shadows. And what seems to work instead is more like an attitude or a posture towards alignment of like what is desired, and allowing and welcoming, you know, what isn't, while also seeing like if for instance there's the desire to flip someone off but I don't feel aligned with that, then there's a way that that it isn't true for me, even if the desire is still there. So I find it to be helpful, you know, sort of like how internal family systems has like parts work, like welcoming that part that wants to flip someone off. And then for me, it's like as soon as that part is welcomed and I'm the one that's welcoming it, I am the space. I am bigger than that part. And to me, that feels really consistent with what's true, you know, rather than identifying as what might be that sort of smaller desire. Yeah. So that feels helpful to me, to have the shift from limitations to welcoming and freedom. And I feel like that is more, you know, it's basically, it feels to me like the difference between control and acceptance. So we could just summarize it to like negative and positive path.
Yep. Shang, I see you've got your hand raised. I'm just gonna throw one little piece in as a direct response to the example that Amanda gave, I certainly relate to that experience of being in traffic and having all these desires come up that look like flipping people off or X, Y, and Z. And one of the things that I have experienced that if I go into that in my mind, if I go into that desire to, yell at the person or flip somebody off, often what I find is even that expression, which looks like, looks kind of violent on its surface, comes from love. So like I'll often want to flip somebody off or yell at them because I'm like, you're going to endanger somebody. And I want everyone to be safe out here on the road. And I want, and someone needs to teach you, that you're not doing it right. But ultimately it comes from a sense of like wanting to help, and like, I think even some of the most destructive desires we find in our minds, if we give them their life, if we give them our attention and like let them tell us what they're being, where they're coming from, we often find a loving impulse or a loving, orientation at the very base of it. And it kind of just gets distorted. And that's another reason why it's, in my experience, it's helpful to not just try to push it aside and control it, but actually give it space. Okay, Sean.
We might have talked about this before, but there was one session where Dawn was asking about like alternate timelines and universes, and then Ra basically says like, yeah, every time you think something, it happens somewhere, and the more you think it, the more likely it's going to happen to you. So how does that work with this idea of like, if you have some thoughts where it's not consonant with the law of one, instead of acting them out, imagine them out. How would that work with this other idea of the more you think something, the more likely it's going to happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. BJ, did you want to respond? Great.
Yeah, I think the attempting to overcome something is actually putting a lot of thought onto it in a way, as opposed to giving it space and just like, oh, I want to flip somebody off, give it the space and then it can resolve itself. So to me, it feels consistent. Like if I attempt to overcome that feeling of rage or whatever it is,
You're suppressing it and it stays.
Suppressing it, which actually gives it a lot of attention.
Whereas the other one is releasing it. Like,
yeah,
experience it in your imagination so that it can be let go.
So it can move. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to add on to that, which my perspective is, it seems very much to me like what Ra teaches is desire is the engine of creation. Like the one infinite creator manifests the universe because of its desire to know itself. And its desire to know itself is infinite because its capacity to take form is infinite. The one infinite creator has infinite power, infinite latitude to be anything. And so it's desire that really is the engine. It's really fundamentally the primary energy that generates universes. And I think Ra's pointing to in this Q&A, Ra's pointing to, and I think you said it well, BJ, like if we suppress it, it doesn't actually resolve the desire. It doesn't like make it go away. In fact, to suppress some shadow desire or something that's not ultimately in alignment with our true self does sort of give it more energy. It feeds it for a longer period of time, and it's more likely that it will manifest in physical reality somewhere, versus just giving ourselves the time and space to contemplate it and really investigate the desire and where it comes from. It's sort of directly serving the creator, because the creator is interested. All of our desires, everything that can ever appear in our minds, is a portion of the creator's infinite desire, infinite thought. And so how do we participate in that? BJ?
Yeah, I just want to give a quick example from my own life. That is, when I was little, probably like 8 or something, my brother was watching it. And I just like happened to be in the room and was in the room for like, I don't know, 5 minutes or something, but I'm still traumatized by seeing this little clip of that movie. And when I get up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, there'll often be the creepy, scary clown in the bathroom with me, like consistently. But like when I attempt to go like, okay, look, he's not there. There's nobody there. Like, go away. It doesn't go away. But then every so often, like, I've done it probably 4 times or so. Like I will, in my imagination, invite him in, welcome him, speak to him, and then he goes away for like 6 months or a year or something, and then I'll come back. But after I specifically go like, hey, how you doing? What's up? Do you need something? Like check in with them, then he goes away, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I resonate with that. Caroline?
Yeah, I was thinking of the what pinged for me was the notion of spiritual bypassing, that Ra makes it pretty clear that if we try to take the shortcut and bypass the allowance of the expression of whatever that emotion is, whatever that feeling is, and accepting that is maybe a shadow or something of that nature, but to be analyzed with care, as he puts it, to me really struck a beautiful, loving chord. It's compassion for self, it's compassion for others in that moment. And then I see that through the movement of this awareness and this acceptance and this movement towards self-love, that you automatically then shift to be more aligned with the infinite creator. And Ra says it takes patience and experience and compassion for self and for others. But it's sort of like the more we try to hold on to that, stuff it down, or whatever it is, spiritually bypass, that we're actually moving in a distorted fashion against the law of one. So it is important that we feel this, that we see it, that we acknowledge, and we let this emotion come to the surface. Because otherwise, I just kept thinking of the term spiritual bypassing. And I think the flow of this, as we do more of that, naturally brings us to service, the path of service to others.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Caroline. That that came up for me too. The notion of spiritual bypassing feels really inherent in this Q&A, this piece here of like how it's so natural and it's so innocent. It's like once you find yourself claiming your heart and claiming like, I want to be a loving person in the world, it's hard to have feelings come up that seem so counter to that. And it's so natural to it's so understandable to want to bypass it, to want to stuff it down, to want to, like, no, that's not me. It's really, I have a lot of compassion for the impulse to spiritually bypass. I mean, I certainly do it and have done it and probably will continue to do it until I don't anymore. And, I feel like it's a natural, once people enter them, find themselves on a spiritual path, it's natural to want to like resist that which seems like it's counter to our own nature. And I think this is a really advanced lesson that Ra offers here. And it's actually quite unique in my experience of this system of spiritual seeking that Ra teaches, to not, and I appreciate what you said, BJ. It's like, it really gets my attention when they say it's inappropriate in the extreme to suggest the just the resistance of what comes up in us and to try to bypass our desires. It's a really powerful part of this teaching. And, it's unique. A lot of religious systems or other spiritual systems, naturally try to give rules to what it should look like to be on a spiritual path, and it's like, well, that seems pretty understandable to want to be like, these are the norms of experience we expect of you. Norms of behavior. And it's like, this system of what Ra teaches is just so radically, it's so much about radical authenticity. Like, we have to be so honest with ourselves, because at the end of the day, it's like whatever is inside of us is inside of us. You can try to like pretend it's not there or control it, but that's not how evolution works. Being with what's actually inside of us in an authentic way is how we come to know ourselves, accept ourselves, and then ultimately become the creator. Yeah, this is one of my favorite, I think one of my favorite pieces from the whole book is this one Q&A. It really impacts me a lot.
I was just going to add that so many times, I think in my experience as a spiritual being, so many of us just want to manifest the top 3 chakras. Like, I need to be in that space of the crown down to the heart, and we ignore those lower chakras. And I think that the acceptance of this, these lower nature, whatever you might call them, or when we have to ask ourselves and do it, or I ask myself, I should speak for myself, the inquiry of what chakra is this addressing? I need to go back to the root or the sacral or whatever it may be, the lower ones, because that's probably where I need to diffuse this energy or this distortion that I have, but not to bypass it. But I think, so many of us on this path just think that it's all about living in this top part of our chakral beingness. But we have to go back. I have to go back and address like what chakra is speaking to me right now. And this today, when I mentioned being in this space of looking at conflict, it's going to the root of the problem, pardon the pun, maybe in my root chakra here, safety, security. But I've got to be willing to say that doesn't mean I'm a spiritual beginner. I'm not a bypasser. I want to figure out where the root of this issue is, and then let it be felt, seen, heard, and transmuted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it reminds me of just in the last couple of sessions, somewhere Ra talks about describing fourth density, and they say that each individual entity, our differences become pronounced. Like, our essential uniqueness as souls, actually in fourth density we become more unique. We don't become like a homogeneous blob. We each get to express like this really unique flavor of the creator. And all that uniqueness comes from the lower triad. It comes from the lower chakras. It comes from our personal unique selves. Like, my read on the upper chakras is they're all universal. Those chakras are all about the creator and like the universal qualities. And our uniqueness comes from our lower 3 chakras. It comes from our sense of individualization. It's a really important part of the process, is to individualize first, and then to play the infinite universal game as an individual. And so, yeah, the honoring of the lower triad, the lower chakras, is really important. And I appreciate that point, Caroline.
I never thought of it that way before. That, like, I've noticed that part of the description of fourth density, that our differences become accentuated or whatever it is. But just that piece of our uniqueness comes from the lower triad. That's really interesting. And like sharing our unique love of the creator. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Like, the personality is more of the lower triad.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting food for thought.
Yeah, cool. Nice. Any other comments on this one before we move on? Anything anyone else noticed or wants to say?
I've got a quick one.
Yeah.
When looking at accepting self, looking at doing the real shadow work, when it gets hard, we're third density animals, and we are very much still ruled by DNA and animalistic instincts. And one of those is to avoid pain. And the brain, it's a survival instinct to avoid pain. So emotional pain and the real spiritual growth happens as we shine the light on those shadowy corners. And it's one of the reasons why we do the quote spiritual bypassing, why it's so common, is because we want to avoid even the slightest little bit of pain, which could come in the form of shame or fear or any of those lower animal type, lower chakra animal type primal instincts and urges. I feel like it helps me when I remind myself, when I catch myself avoiding, I tend to jump into berating myself. Oh, I caught you, you're doing this thing again. Oh, shame on me. But it's just, that's part of the acceptance piece, that even the fact that we even do the avoidance tactics, because it's natural to avoid pain, even the slightest little bit. So just inviting everyone here and everywhere to give yourselves a little break. It's perfectly natural and normal to try to do the spiritual bypassing because we want to avoid pain. But notice the awareness, the acceptance. We're all just the facet of the creator experiencing itself, and it's okay. You still have choice, free will choice, and that's where that gets woven into as a growth piece as well.
Yeah, I love that, Nia. I love how that invites us into having compassion for why do we try to avoid uncomfortable feelings? Why do we try to avoid painful experiences? Why do we try to, it's like, oh, it's natural. It's like, it's a part of our evolution as animals to avoid pain. And it has a life-serving purpose. And I appreciate that insight. And to just call on what we'll get into much later in the material, in the archetypal mind, in the study of the tarot, in the symbology of the cards, you realize that as third density entities, there's kind of a natural baseline bias towards the negative path. Like in the figures of the cards, there is many of the figures are tilted towards the left. They're turning their attention towards the left. And that's because it's natural for us to, as we begin third density, as third density entities, it's natural to be inclined towards service to self. It's natural to it's everything our senses tell us is that we're separate, is that we're independent entities, and we need to look out for our own well-being. We need to look out for our survival. And that inclines us towards the service to self path. It's like the bias of third density is to service to self, actually. And so it feels related to the ways that we can, if we can just watch ourselves and what is natural for us and how we move, and that, avoiding pain is a natural part of our experience, and then bring our attention and our awareness there, it can be a huge boost on our capacity to meet what comes without resistance. Anyway, so I just putting a plug in for what we'll get into in the future in the archetypal mind, and that might have gone over your heads, but anyway, it's a fascinating part of that has made an impact on me. So, okay, let us continue. 18.6. Anyone else feel like reading?
I can.
Great.
Questioner. Basically, I would say that to infringe on the free will of another self or another entity would be the basic thing never to do under the law of one. Can you state any other breaking of the law of one than this basic rule? I am Ra. As one proceeds from the primal distortion of free will, one proceeds to the understanding of the focal points of intelligent energy, which have created the intelligences or the ways of a particular mind-body-spirit complex in its environment, both what you would call natural and what you would call man-made. Thus, the distortions to be avoided are those which do not take into consideration the distortions of the focus of energy of love light, or shall we say the logos of this particular sphere or density. These include the lack of understanding of the needs of the natural environment, the needs of other selves, mind, body, spirit complexes. These are many due to the various distortions of man-made complexes in which the intelligence and awareness of entities themselves have chosen a way of using energies available. Thus, what would be an improper distortion with one entity is proper with another. We can suggest an attempt to become aware of the other self as self, and thus do that action which is needed by other self, understanding from the other self's intelligence and awareness. In many cases, this does not involve the breaking of the distortion of free will into a distortion or fragmentation called infringement. However, it is a delicate matter to be of service, and compassion, sensitivity, and an ability to empathize are helpful in avoiding the distortions of man-made intelligence and awareness. The area or arena called the societal complex is an arena in which there are no particular needs for care, for it is the prerogative, honor/duty of those in the particular planetary sphere to act according to its free will for the attempted aid of the social complex. Thus, you have two simple directives: awareness of the intelligent energy expressed in nature, awareness of the intelligent energy expressed in self to be shared when it seems appropriate by the entity with the social complex. And you have one infinitely subtle and various sets of distortions of which you may be aware. That is, distortions with respect to self and other selves, not concerning free will, but concerning harmonious relationships and service to others, as other selves would most benefit. Discuss? I've lost my sound.
Sorry, that was me.
Or is that you? Okay.
That was me. Sorry. My apologies. I was just going to restate the question. So, the question basically is like, Don is saying the primary thing that if we're on the positive path that we would want to avoid is infringing on the free will of another self. Is that right? And then Don gives a pretty long and complex answer. So what do y'all make of that? What is Ross saying? What insights do you get from that? Caroline.
Okay, so in the mention from Ra, what would be an improper distortion with one entity is proper with another? We can suggest an attempt to become aware of the other self as self. So I guess I have a question. Improper for me is proper, could be proper for you. And that's where the understanding of free will, that what I think is acceptable is different from what you perceive as acceptable. Thus, it is not my doing to infringe upon your choices. Is this where this is going? Because I wasn't sure if I'm a little unclear if I may state that in an obvious way. It felt to me when I read this that the understanding that we all have choices and perceive things differently leads to the understanding that what's proper for me may not be proper or moral to you, or vice versa, that I stay in my lane, so to speak, and be the love light of which we are called to be. But I think for me, that's a place of holding space for, as I said today, grace to me is just letting what happens happen, that you have those choices. I don't have to let anything impact me personally, as one of the 4 agreements says. In many cases says this does not involve the breaking of the distortion of free will into fragmentation. So is it to say I'm copacetic with your choices? I choose to love you, but I do not have to participate.
BJ, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I took it to mean something different, which may or not be actually different, but I was taking it to mean like what might be helpful for me to do with Amanda may not be helpful for me to do with Aaron. That just a slightly different interpretation, but it might have implications.
What I get from, if I'm hearing you correctly, Caroline, what I'm getting from you sounds to me to have to do with more about accepting what happens to us or what happens in our environment than what Ra is speaking to here, which is like, how do we interact with, how do we proactively, with our own volition, interface with the societal complex? How do we interface with other selves in a way that's consummate with the law of one? How do we navigate our desire to help, our desire to contribute, our desire to like, manifest whatever it is we're here to manifest in the context of relationship with the people in our lives in a way that doesn't break free will. And I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, but I was kind of hearing from you a little bit more about like, how do we accept what happens in our environment or what happens in our relationships? So I'll just leave it at that and see if that, how's that sound?
I appreciate both perspectives, of you and BJ both, and thank you. That is free will for me. It's the interpretation. They all make sense. And I think what law of one speaks to me in this matter, it is about the acceptance of other people's choices. And yes, how do I interface with this plane of existence with all these soul beings, knowing that we're all here with free will, but I love you anyway. I'm not here to, I think it helps me let go of maybe judgment or piousness or something to that nature. This is what pings for me as I read this. It's when you rise into, I don't need to be right. I don't need you to be different so that I feel okay. I respect your right to have choice. So yeah, I hear all sides here. So it's beautiful. The different understandings are beautiful and appreciated. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a bit of a complex and maybe a little bit complicated, portion of the reading. It's, it's not super easy to get in my opinion, what Ra is saying here. And I think from my perspective, the reason why that is because what they're describing is also quite nuanced and subtle and delicate. Like the question of how do we go about being in relationship with other selves? We've claimed the positive path. We're trying to be of service. We're trying to show up in the lives of the people around us in a way that's going to be uplifting to them. But how do we do that? How do we actually do that? How do we know that the choices we make are going to be supportive to them? Because, what's supportive to us isn't always supportive. Sometimes what's supportive to us might land for somebody else as like a smack in the face. You know what I mean? Like it's so complicated and difficult to navigate this question. And that's the territory that they're speaking to.
I mean, you can't know that though. Like literally you can't, like that's the nature of our density.
Right.
Doesn't is the golden rule like do unto others as you would do unto, you would have them do unto you, whatever, something like that?
Yep, that's it.
So that's what Jesus said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or probably not just Jesus, but this entire answer seems like a more nuanced interpretation of that.
Mm-hmm.
Although that third paragraph, I have no idea what he's talking about with the societal complex. How there are no particular needs for care. I don't know why the society is different. I guess everyone can just go. Is he saying like it's a free for all, do whatever you want? That's the nature of society. I don't know. I would appreciate if someone interpreted that third paragraph for me, because I have no idea what he's saying there.
Cool. It seems like, okay, so Nia, I see your hand up, and then Amanda, it seems like you raised your hand in response to Shang's question. Okay, go ahead.
The way that I interpreted that paragraph is I'm thinking about, I'm associating it, like, say, with the political arena, so after we get beyond where there are no particular needs for care, like after everybody's basic needs are met, then it's up to everybody to act according to their free will. Like, the way that I interpreted it was like, first let's take care of our needs, or take care of our needs as a society or as a people. So,
Does that make sense? Does that land for you, Sean?
That does make sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
like once you meet the basic needs, then just everything else is up up for grabs in some way, I guess.
and it's a free will for all.
Nia?
What I was getting out of this is walking in someone else's shoes. It's at the top, he's talking about, I said the top of the answer. Saying that what is happening to an entity is natural in their free will choice. And it's not up to us to judge or say what is proper or what is not proper. For example, diet, or choosing to eat meat or choosing not to. That is a fundamental in a lot of religious practices as a whole. It's a blanket statement as expectation. However, that may or may not work for everyone, and it's not up to us to judge what is or isn't proper for another entity. So also, someone's response around fears or judgments may have to do with catalysts that's happened to them in this life or previous incarnations coming in. That is also part of their prerogative in their free will choice as a mind, body, spirit complex totality to have put in place these pre-incarnative choices. And so what really pinged for me out of that was these are choices for catalysts for growth, and it's not us to judge. Even what we consider a helping hand, one of the fundamental rules of Reiki is that you have to have permission first. It's been said that you can karmically bypass people's lessons by forcing a Reiki healing in there. And that's what's called a karmic pitfall, where we end up over, or you could say spell work in the occult world, or you could say, whatever these like forceful metaphysical energies putting forward. It's not up to us to judge what's going on in someone else's life as needing to be helpful. And when you're talking about Reiki in classes and they're like, but if there's a car accident on the side of the road, surely I'm allowed to send Reiki energy for that. And it's like, nope, actually we're not. That could be part of their pre-incarnative plan, and it's not up to us to step in without them specifically asking. And that one was a hard one for a lot of people they're like, surely love and light is for the highest good, period, but they may not need it in that moment. They may need a period of darkness or negativity as a catalyst for their soul's growth that we could never ever understand the intelligent infinity plan. So that was the huge piece that came out of that for me. What's proper for one is not necessarily proper for another. And
Yeah, it's a great example and a great metaphor, because being a Reiki practitioner and specifically offering love light or Reiki energy, is one context of how we might be of service to another. But I do think it translates to all of our interactions. Like, the safest bet is always to just wait for someone to ask and tell you specifically how they want you to help them. But how often do people do that? That's pretty rare, right? So we find ourselves in this middle ground. Almost all of our choices that we have to make in relationship are in this context of people haven't told us what they want or what they need. And sometimes they tell us what they want and they need, and what they're saying isn't actually what they want and what they need. It's coming from a wounded place, So one of the things I take away from this whole piece is, Ra has said in another session that wanderers come to third density to work out the imbalances between love and wisdom. They come to third density to work out the imbalances that they still have between love and wisdom, because in third density, the subtlety available in relationship, when you're behind the veil and you don't know what the other person wants, and you don't know what they need, and you have to make a choice anyway, it's so powerful to help us align our own sense of balance between love and wisdom in third density. And like lessons that might take literally thousands or tens of thousands of years to learn in sixth density, we can learn in one lifetime in third density. So many souls want to come back to third density to have the experience of being veiled and be forced to be in relationship and to work out this sense of like, how do I do this? And it forces us to learn lessons about love and wisdom and how to be in balance in love and wisdom in a way that's very, very metaphysically potent. And it's because of how difficult it is to know how to respect free will, the free will of others in third density. So may we all make good use of this context to learn the lessons that we desire to learn. I really particularly appreciated in the third paragraph where Ra says, however, it is a delicate matter to be of service. It's a delicate matter. It's infinitely subtle. And compassion, sensitivity, and an ability to empathize are helpful. I mean, right? That just seems so true and clear. Compassion, sensitivity, empathy.
See also my check-in.
Okay. People feel good about moving forward? Should we move on? Okay. Okay. All right. 18.7. As an entity in this density grows from childhood, he becomes more aware of his responsibilities. Is there an age below which an entity is not responsible for his actions, or is he responsible from the time of birth? Ra, I am Ra. An entity incarnating upon the earth plane becomes conscious of self as at a varying point in its time-space progress through the continuum. This may have a median, shall we say, of approximately 15 of your months. Some entities become conscious of self at a closer period to incarnation, some at a period farther from this event. In all cases, responsibility then becomes retroactive from that point backwards in the continuum, so that distortions are to be understood by the entity and dissolved as the entity learns. Questioner, then an entity, say, 4 years old, would be totally responsible for any actions that were against or inharmonious with the law of one? Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. It may be noted that it has been arranged by your social complex structures that the newer entities to incarnation are to be provided with guides of a physical mind-body-spirit complex, thus being able to learn quickly what is consonant with the law of one. Questioner, who are these guides? I am Ra. These guides are what you call parents, teachers, and friends. So what's Ra saying there?
I mean, you're responsible for your actions, right?
At what point? At what point are you responsible for your actions?
That's in it. He said, what was it 15 months? guess Marcus isn't responsible yet. But what does that mean? Like I guess it has to do with some sort of developmental milestone, right? Where the kid realizes that I mean, we've read a little bit about developmental psychology with Marcus, but I know we've read that like at least early childhood is more of like the fourth trimester. At like the baby he doesn't know he doesn't even know he's a being. Like he doesn't know he's separate from mom.
Right.
And at some point, baby realizes, oh hey, I'm a dude. Like I'm my own little guy. I can do things. And I think that's probably that there's some developmental milestone where he realizes that he has agency. And I think as soon as that agency kicks in, that probably corresponds to there must be some metaphysical link with like linking with the mind body spirit complex where it really settles in and starts like recording in a sense.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. Rock calls it consciousness of self. Caroline?
I think it's when the human discovers that they have a hand. There's a place in this developmental milestone of all children, all infants, when one day like this arm comes into their awareness and it's like, oh, I have this hand and I have this, and then it goes away and they forget that they have it. Then it comes into their eyesight vision. I really think I thought about that when I read this question or this piece. I think that's when awareness starts to settle in. Now, are we conscious of our choices at that point? No, but the awareness begins to plant a seed, that I have this hand and I have these pieces of my body or whatever. So I was wondering too, if then we're not conscious of our choices at that stage of development, but when we do become conscious, is it our responsibility to go back and heal, or back linearly speaking, I suppose, and heal from maybe, obviously prior to this incarnation? Is that we incarnate on this earth plane, awareness sets in at, in a physical level. And then if we blessed enough to develop a consciousness, we can go back and fix what's already happened. I mean, I'm wondering, 15 months is so arbitrary. I was like, where'd this come from? Some are born unveiled, I suppose, they just come in aware from the get-go. But he says that things can, in all cases, responsibility then becomes retroactive. So I become aware, now it's time to, I use time flexibly here, but that I can heal in an instant. I could heal all these incarnations prior to. So we have like this little period and then we can go back. I don't know. That's how I see it. And I do think it starts with the awareness they always do this. I see I have a hand. It's beautiful to witness, and I've seen it actually happen in real time.
Yeah, what I appreciate what you said, what seems like the connection to me, Caroline, between you said and what Sean, you said about agency. Our hands are such powerful symbols of agency. Our hands are such a primal way that we interface with our reality. They're so, they're so central to how we manipulate and how we interface with our surroundings. It does feel like our hands and the awareness of our hands as a baby, as a child, does seem like a really potent aspect of becoming self-conscious and aware of our agency. That feels really true to me too. BJ?
Well, I've heard it said that we're born of desire, from a few different mystics, that like that there is awareness that is associated with the body, but it isn't in a sense like magnetically attracted to the body, or like, the way that we seem to carry awareness with the body wherever it goes. I've heard it said that happens at about somewhere around 15 months too, or potentially earlier, and that is born of desire, that it happens when there is an individualized sense of I, and the I becomes individualized when there is something that I desires, which is really interesting to me. It seems like the second distortion, the distortion of love, or that's the way that I interpret that, is like our that we each have unique desire. So yeah, I just feel like that corresponds with this telling, and also specifically interesting because of what we were discussing earlier about the importance of desire and how to honor desire. So yeah, I felt like sharing that part. And then I also really appreciate the like how then we're retroactively responsible. And I feel like that really resonates for me, like we're, how there's so much healing that can be done, and that, like, I think is called for us to be done in our past, that like anything that is still being carried as a resentment or as a frustration, or anything that isn't like 100% forgiven, is still our responsibility to what did they say, dissolve dissolve the distortion. Yeah, understood by the entity and dissolved as the entity learns. So that part stood out to me too. I just appreciate like any distortion that stands out in our past is ours to work with. And it's like, yeah, I don't know what exactly to say about that.
Okay. Thanks, BJ. Nia? You're muted.
Thank you. First, I want to give props to Ra for saying the mean instead of the average. Averages drive me bonkers because they're taking the extreme top and the extreme bottom and mixing all those up. The
Median.
mean is
They say
median
median.
is in the middle. And I'm like, thank you. That's more relative than average. So anyway, my point back to the primal human part, there's a book called Hunt, Gather, Parent. And a woman has a 3-year-old. She works for NPR. She travels around interviewing indigenous cultures and how they raise children. She was dealing with a 3-year-old young girl who was having anger issues, extreme anger issues at 3. Some people believe that preschoolers are not aware of their actions. Others like to have a cultural suppression of actions and explain expectations and not allow for our extreme ups and downs. The example this woman gave that changed her life, it also changed my life in parenting as well, is she was I believe it was the Incas. They're in an igloo covered in furs. It's a little village. She said that she spent weeks there and she could not tell which child belonged to which adult, who parented who, because the entire village, if a child fell and stubbed their knee, stubbed their toe, hurt themselves, the nearest adult, no matter who it was, picked them up and hugged them and catered to them, cared for them, and put them down, and they went on their way. What happened one evening is a child was told they couldn't do something. And this was a young preschool child. I forget the age, but I want to say 3 or 4 tops. And it was the woman's grandchild said, I want to go do something. And the grandmother said, no, we're not doing that right now. The child responded with kicking and screaming. And the grandmother had picked the child up to help comfort it. And the child raked her fingers down grandmother's face and like scratched her to bleeding. And the child's just in a frenzy, not cognitive of what they were doing. The grandmother spun the child around in a circle until she giggled, put her down, and she went on her way. And the woman watched this interaction. There was no negative response to what the 3-year-old had just done. Didn't even acknowledge that it happened. So it leads into the question of, when are we responsible for our actions and choices? And to me, that what my biggest takeaway from that was to not shame littles for expectations that they're not aware of. That little girl was authentically angry in that moment, had no idea that she had just hurt someone, but instead of calling responsibility and shaming her for her actions, the grandmother let it go and let her on her way. And it changed my parenting style around that as well, because and I had read a lot of parenting books and a lot of things around new ways of parenting, and to not do our normal cultural bias, but still teach empathy and compassion and positive path, love for others as love for self. That's something we can be cognitively taught and then allow that to come forward. But that it to me is a primal human factor too, of when we become cognitive of our self and agency around that. So that was a huge, as a third density human being, regardless of culture, where that could come into play for responsibility for your actions.
Yeah. Yeah, this, Ra doesn't get asked questions very much about parenting and about children. There's only a few Q&As that I'm aware of that they bring up the relationship between parents and children, and what it is to be a child or a young one on Earth in third density, but this is one of them. And, it really brings me into reflection of, like, what would it be like if we, if we really understood this? Because in our society, at least in the West, the so-called West, it's like children don't really become independent agents until they're 18, become adults. And until they're 18, the parents are responsible legally for the children's actions. But it's not just legal. It's like, you feel it as if you're a parent and you go out into public spaces with your child, you feel the pressure of the other parents. This is my experience. Maybe I'm projecting, but it's just like I feel the expectations that you're supposed to be able to control your child or get your child to sort of be whatever way the norms or the mores in that space are expecting your child to live up to. And that's just not real. Like, of course I can't control my child. Like, I'm myself, my child is themselves. Like, they're two different entities, but you experience it, and it's a really common thing to, and it's even enshrined in our legal system that parents are responsible legally for the actions of their children until they're 18 years old. And that's like, and I'm not saying that's bad or wrong. I'm not saying that that shouldn't be the case, but I do wonder what it would be like if we understood that children are spiritually capable of understanding that they have their own independent agency at 15 months old. Like, what would change about how we organized ourselves, and our relationship between children and parents? I suspect it'd be quite different than what we have now. I don't know.
It seems just vastly more honoring of free will and individual uniqueness. It just seems like, whoa, I just took that on for a moment. I feel like I feel incredibly more empowered if I'm seen as a whole self at 15 months old. Wow.
Yeah, totally. Any other comments on this one?
I was thinking the retroactive might have, it's not just at the point of looking back at like previous lives. It could just be, it could be like I look back now and I like cringe at all the stupid things I did when I was young. It could, what that could also imply is like from that point, anything you do, you look back, you're responsible from then that point on for anything that you do. Looking back when you're older, also, because like, yeah, like at 15 months, you're your own guy. You're now responsible for your actions because you've attained agency, but you don't know what you're doing. Like you don't know what that little kid who's scratching his grandma, like she probably has some sense that that's probably not a good thing to do, but like her brain's probably not developed enough to like have the restraint to like not throw a tantrum. So there is some balance between like they still need some time to figure things out, like how to actually responsibly use that agency. But
Absolutely. I
yeah.
think we're still figuring it how to responsibly use our agency.
Well, it's a great example about, you know, like the child and the grandma and the scratching. It's like, what from the perspective of a spiritual evolution, what's more valuable, to have the impulse to scratch and then to use the intellectual faculties to like analyze and be like, oh, but that's not going to get, you know, whatever, and then to not do it, and then the event doesn't happen? Or is it to have the experience of being the one who scratched, seeing the impact of the scratch, and then have to deal with that? And then also the grandmother too, you know, like there's two entities there involved. I mean, I don't have an answer for it, but I think that the setup here is to make mistakes. Like the way that spiritual evolution takes place is to make mistakes. And without the capacity to make mistakes, I'm not sure how quickly evolution actually even is capable of proceeding without the opportunity to make mistakes.
I want to chime in on something you said, Aaron. When my littles were still babies and I was taking some class, you know, one of the things that it discussed was, if your child is crying in a restaurant, well, our cultural societal norm says you are responsible for your child's crying that is therefore interfering in my dinner at this restaurant that I'm paying good money to go to. And this is my table and my space, and I have to hear some baby crying. Well, the baby is authentically hungry. It is very hard for a little to wait, especially a toddler or smaller, say 15 months of age or so. And what they said was that this gets into the literal definition of ostracized. We have a peer pressure in our culture, and we have an underlying physical, metaphysical kind of cord connection in the field with every other self that's in that restaurant. And we as adults subconsciously and culturally are trained to perceive, and this gets into the primal human thing, where it's a survival strategy to not be ostracized from the group. If my baby is crying and I'm getting dirty looks from the other table over there, they're energetically disconnecting. This is what I was trying to get at. There's like this energetic, the cord is disconnected. They have shunned you for your baby crying. And we feel that on a metaphysical level, that one little cord being disconnected, that one little thread being disconnected. We feel this. And it's our primal instinct to not be ostracized. To be ostracized, let's say Neanderthal days, meant the literal definition is to turn your back unto death. Meaning, if we were not accepted by our peers, we were kicked from the cave and we didn't get food, shelter, warmth, etc. And we still primally feel the need to be accepted by our peers. And therefore we worry about what the other table thinks of us when our baby's crying, instead of just being with our baby and trying to soothe the baby for the sake of the baby. We're soothing it for the sake of not feeling a disconnect from the people around us. And so that's another one of those primal human aspects that shows up. Plus, it's culturally taught that you should care more about what a stranger thinks at another table at a restaurant than you should care about the fact that your baby is authentically expressing themselves and there's nothing wrong with it. Of course, try to soothe it and make it feel better, but are you doing it for the baby's sake, or are you doing it for the sake of being concerned about what the other person over there thinks that has never had a child and doesn't understand? So there's that aspect within us to seek cultural norms and pure acceptance, to not be energetically ostracized even from a stranger. And so a lot of our subconscious doings are from that place. And as we continue to grow and learn and get to a know yourself, why do I care? Because it was a cultural thing I was taught, instead of I care more about what my baby thinks. Know yourself, accept yourself, be creator. And that paying attention to your little for the sake of them rather than the sake of a stranger at a table for fear of energetic ostracization. Anyway, that was the overlap of that.
Yeah. Right. And well, and you know, one of the things I get from that is like the awareness of how you know, in the earlier Q&A that we read about the social complex, the societal complex, and how to be of service to others, and in congruence with law of one. You know, in the scope of the social, in the social realm, it becomes exponentially more complicated to know how to make decisions, and you know, to not even to know how to make decisions, but like the information available to us, the processes that go on in our mind when we're in a social space are just that much more complex. There's that much more information. Like when we're in a restaurant, you know, the truth of it is, they're all just all those people in the restaurant are just extensions of ourself, of our greater self. And we are connected. We do have cords to all those people. And so there's just a lot more complexity to the information available. There's a lot more complexity to the impulses, to the sense of what's correct or right or desirable. And, you know, just to operate in the social sphere is inherently more complex than to operate in a one-on-one relationship, or just, you know, to operate within ourselves. And yeah, I think that's a part of the teaching of like what it is to be in a social complex prior to social memory complex, where it's all obvious what everyone's thinking and knowing and experiencing. But here in third density, it's a social complex. It's not a social memory complex. And yeah, it's yet another opportunity to give ourselves compassion when we move in social spaces, because of how much complexity there is there. It's difficult to harmonize with a whole group of people who don't know what's going on for each other and what we've been through and all the rest. So yeah, social complex is complex. Caroline.
Yeah, I know our time's almost up, but I was thinking beyond just people. It's also the complex of living with animals and nature and all of that. And my observance of human behavior is, so often humans become perturbed or upset or frantic and angry with animals just behaving in the way that is their instinct, and not respecting the law of the creatures and the nature and everything else. And I remember having a conversation years ago with my biological mother that, you know, she was angry about squirrels doing their thing in her yard. And I'm like, but that's all they know. That's what they came into this world to do, to eat the nuts or the seeds out of your bird feeder. But so much of what we've been discussing, I keep thinking in terms of like the animal world and the animal kingdom. And I don't know, to observe animals in real time in nature, just a harmonious actions they display oftentimes to one another, but people become incensed that I can't control you and make you into something I want you to be, so that I feel, I feel better. But they're just acting upon what they were created to be. So I thought about that when he was talking about children, and I said we can even go into the laws of the animal kingdom as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's definitely going to be it for what we read today. But is there, in the last moment, is there any other thoughts or insights or questions about anything we've read today that anybody wants to share?
I love all of y'all on this tender journey. Thanks for doing your best.
Yeah.
Thanks, BJ. That's really sweet.
I have a question. Did Raw even state what was an infringement on the, like, did his answer or their answer actually get defined by what is an infringement of free will?
Well, that's a great, we could really unpack that one for a while. It brings up lots of questions for me. I have things to say about it. I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think that there's like some underlined, underscored, this is the final answer on what it is to infringe on free will. And that's further, I think that's what I'm saying is further illuminated by when they talk about the negative, those in the negative path and how they interface with free will. It's like they never really give an answer. They say that the negative people on the negative path sort of have to interface with free will because it doesn't impact their own polarity, but they don't care about it. They don't care about the free will of others, but they do care about it because it impacts their own polarity. And ultimately, it's an unsolvable paradox because there's only one being.
There's a
How, it's like there's only one of us here at the level of the law of one. There's only the one infinite creator.
I think
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
There's something measurable in terms of fragmentation. There's some terms that I suspect there is a measurable phenomenon where you can actually measure if free will has been infringed.
Because congruent with the law of one, according to Ra, almost everything is in accordance with the law of one. Almost everything is, including the negative path. Oh, they're okay because they're part of, we're all just tripping out on the wait. How's, love and light here. Wait a second, but first distortion is free will. So backing up to everything, almost everything that exists is allowed within the law of one.
Yep.
Whether it's positive or negative, it's still zoomed out part of the one infinite creator. If it's here, if it's existing, if it's a thing, if it's happened, it's part of congruent with law of one because everything is.
Right. And when Ra describes the law, defines the law of one, they say that there is no right or wrong. Universally, there is no right or wrong. But there is efficient use of the love and light of the creator to progress yourself along your own path of evolution. And if you're on the positive path, there are actions that will help you proceed in the positive path more efficiently than others. And that does have to do with how you use your will to interface with others. And I think that's ultimately where the answer lies. It's not about some universal morality about what is it infringing on. And I think this probably ties into what you were saying, Sean. There is a way to be efficient about your own evolution. And if you're on the positive path, it will have a lot to do with how you interface with other people and how you respect their free will. And yeah, ultimately it's about, sort of the efficient use of energy of the love and the light of the creator. Anyway, there's a lot more we could unpack there, but we are a little bit past time. And so, yeah, I'll call it there and we can pick it up again next week. So yeah, we'll pick up, for those who join next week, we'll just go ahead and continue at 1811 for next week's study. Thank you all so much for a wonderful discussion and session studying law.
Thank you, everyone.
Y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a wonderful
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.